All right, today we are going to start reading Volume 2 of the collected works of C.G. Jung. And this will not just be a straight reading because obviously, if I'm going to read this, I want to go through it and understand everything. So, as we read it, we'll be looking up words and thinking about what is trying to be said. And also, because my main channel is teaching English, I will, in a way, pretend that even if you do speak English, you don't, and I will try to explain things to you as far as I understand them, as if you don't speak English. So, in other words, we'll be trying to summarize things in very simple terminology, very simple words. All right, well, let's get started and start reading Jung, Volume 1, or Volume 2. Let's see. So, Volume 2 starts with Studies in Word Association. The Associations of Normal Subjects by C.G. Jung and Franz Ricklin. For some time past, attention has been paid in this clinic to the process of association. In order to produce scientifically useful material for this, my director, Professor Bleuler, has compiled a list of 156 stimulus words and experimented with them on all types of psychosis. In these experiments, a very considerable difficulty soon presented itself. There existed no means of precisely and quantitatively separating association in abnormal subjects from that in normal subjects. So they were doing word association with people who had some difficulties or problems, mental problems. And the question he's posing is, well, what's the difference between a normal person and a person with some type of psychosis? No work has been done giving any facts on the range of normal subjects and formulating the apparently chaotic coincidences of association into rules. In order to fill this gap to some extent and thereby pave the way for experiments on pathological associations, I decided to collect more material on association in normal people, and at the same time to study the principal conditions involved. I carried out this plan with my colleague, Dr. Ricklin. So he's, I guess, making a baseline, something to compare abnormal associations with what they consider to be normal associations. The main experimental methods are as follows. Initially, we collected associations from a large number of normal people, with the intention first of examining the reactions to see whether they are, at all, subject to any law. What do they mean by normal people, though? Is that just people that don't have any complaints? Let's see. Next, of discovering whether individual patterns occur, whether any definite reaction types are to be found. We combined with this a second experiment of a general psychological nature. The mechanism of association is an extraordinary fleeting and variable psychic process. It is subject to countless psychic events which cannot be objectively established. Among the psychic factors that exert the main influence on the mechanism of association, attention is of cardinal importance. Among the psychic factors that exert the main influence of the mechanism of association, so you have to be very focused when you're doing word association, apparently. It is the factor that in the first place directs and modifies the process of association. It is also both the psychic factor that can most easily be subjected to the experiment and the delicate affective apparatus that reacts first in abnormal physical mental conditions and thereby modifies the associative performance. Whoa. Let's try that again. Among the psychic factors that exert the main influence on the mechanism of association, attention is of cardinal importance. So attention is very important when doing this, paying attention, being very focused. Attention is the factor that in the first place directs and modifies the process of association. So attention directs the process of association, but also modifies it. What does that mean that it modifies it? I'm not sure. It is also both the psychic factor that can most easily be subjected to experiment. So attention is something easy to experiment with, and the delicate, effective apparatus that reacts first in abnormal physical and mental conditions. So it's easy to, and if you're watching this, I see there's some people watching. If you have any ideas, please join in, because I have just reading along trying to figure this out. It is a delicate, effective apparatus that reacts first in abnormal. So it's like it's the easiest thing to detect if there's something wrong with you that you're not paying attention, both in a physical and a mental way, or if there's something wrong with you in a physical or mental way. It's one of the easiest ways to detect how you're paying attention. I think that's what he's saying. Thereby modifies the associative performance. So how well you focus is an indication of how healthy you are. I think that's what he's saying. And your ability to pay attention also changes how you associate things. That's what I think he's saying. Like I said, if you have a different opinion, please let me know, because I'm just reading, trying to figure this out as we go. Attention is that infinitely complicated mechanism which by countless threads links the associative process with all other phenomena. So attention is that infinitely complicated mechanism which by countless threads links, so attention links the associative process with all other phenomena. So how well you notice things, or how well you are focused on things, countless threads links associative process, affects how you associate things. Okay, I'm going with that. Let's see. Associative process with other phenomenon of psychic and physical domain in consciousness. If we know the effects of attention on the process of association, then we also know, at least in general, the corresponding effects of every psychic event that attention is capable of affecting. If we know the effects of attention on the process of association, then we also know, at least in general, the corresponding effects of every psychic event that attention is capable of affecting. These considerations led us to investigate the effects of attention. I'm not sure if I follow that. These considerations led us to investigate the effects of attention on the process of association, hoping to clarify as precisely as possible the following questions. What are the laws governing the range of association in normal subjects? What are the direct effects of attention on the association process? In particular, does the valency of association decrease with the distance from the focus of consciousness? What is valency? What does that even mean? Valency. Let's see. It says another term for valence. Well, that's not very helpful. I'm going to ask GPT. ChatGPT. Maybe that would give me a better answer. Valency meaning. In linguistic terms, it refers to the capacity of a verb to take a specific number of arguments or participants. Valency indicates how many noun phrases or arguments a verb can or must have. It is also known as verb valence or valency number. A verb with a valency of 1 only takes a subject. For example, in the sentence, she sleeps, the verb sleeps is intransitive. But let's see. In addition to these basic valency patterns, some verbs may change their valency through processes like causativization and reflexivization. Oh my goodness. Understanding valency is crucial for analyzing sentence structure. What could that mean here? Let's see. What are the direct effects of attention on the association process? In particular, does the valency of the association decrease with the distance from the focus of consciousness? Does it mean does it become more focused? Let's see if that works. What are the direct effects of attention on the association process? In particular, does the valency, because valency, if you're talking about linguistics, kind of means how many things can a verb take? Can it take 1? Can it take 2? Can it take 3? Does the valency of the association decrease? Does it become more focused? Does the association become more focused with the distance from the focus? It seems like it would be the opposite. Okay, well, let's see. I give up. Let's keep reading. Our experiments have revealed a series of facts that not only encourage us to follow the paths on which we have set out in psychological regions, but also, as we believe, fit us to do so. Okay, part 1. General experimental procedure. The experiments were carried out alternatively by 2 authors, so that each one in turn undertook a series of experiments on the subjects concerned. Altogether, 38 people took part, 9 educated men, 14 educated women, 7 uneducated men, and 8 uneducated women. The age bracket was 20 to 50 years old. Care was taken to use, as far as possible, normal subjects for the experiment. This, however, led to unexpected difficulties, particularly with the educated subjects. Care was taken to use, as far as possible, normal subjects for the experiment. This, however, led to unexpected difficulties, particularly with the educated subjects, as precisely on this level of concept of normality must be very elastic from the norm in our selection of subjects for experiment. We give the numbers of the subjects in detail, and in many cases combine with this a short description of the personality, which will facilitate the understanding of the possible anomalies. Naturally, the 2 authors have also carried out the experiment on each other. So they got a bunch of people together. But then suddenly they decided, wait a minute, what is normal supposed to be? In noting associations, we have entirely limited ourselves to those produced by calling out stimulus words. We used altogether 400 different stimulus words. These grammatically classified are as follows: nouns 231, adjectives 69, verbs 82, adverbs and numerals 18. The number of syllables was not taken into account. The stimulus words have 1, 2, or 3 syllables, nor were the stimulus words arranged in definite categories as summer, for instance, had arranged them. On the contrary, as much care as possible was taken to see that stimulus words of similar forms or meaning should not follow each other. So they didn't want words to be related to each other. They tried to keep these words apart if they seemed related somehow, so as to avoid the subject adapting to a particular topic after one or two reactions, to avoid themes. Through an unfortunate coincidence, it happened that among the first 100 stimulus words, there were about 30 that can easily be associated according to temporal or spatial coexistence. In the second 100, there are only about 20 of these, which caused a notable difference of coexistence association in the first and second 100. The shortage of stimulus words of this kind is made up by verbs. It was considered important completely to exclude difficult and rare words in order to prevent mistakes or lengthened reaction time due to the lack of knowledge on the part of the subjects. The stimulus words were therefore taken as far as possible from everyday life. So they tried to use very simple words to avoid people getting stuck too quickly or for too long on a particular word. They just wanted reactions. This consideration was all the more essential for us. As with most of our subjects, we had to work under somewhat abnormal linguistic conditions. In German-speaking Switzerland, the vernacular consists, as is well known, of the Swiss German dialect or dialects, which not only deviate considerably from Standard German, but also show significant phonetic differences among themselves. In the schools, children learn Standard German as if it were a foreign language. In later life, educated people gain a fairly complete knowledge of and facility in the German language. The uneducated man, however, unless he has spent considerable time in Germany, retains at best those German phrases that he has learned at school, and later learns little or no more. Nevertheless, literary German is familiar to him in printed or written form, and he also understands it as a spoken language without being able to speak fluent, correct Standard German himself. We try, therefore, in many cases to call out the stimulus words in the dialect form, but we soon noticed that the uneducated subjects did not understand dialect words as well as Standard German. They reacted to the dialect words more laboriously and tried to react in Standard German. This somewhat paradoxical phenomenon can be explained by the fact that Swiss German is purely acoustic motor language, which is very rarely read or written. Everything printed or written is in Standard German. The Swiss is therefore not used to experiencing words individually, but knows them only in acoustic motor connection with others. So is he saying that if you say one word, that confuses them because they only understand them in connection with other words? That's what it sounds like. If he has to say a single word without an article, he will usually choose the Standard German form. We therefore avoided dialect words completely in our experiments. In most cases, a correct Standard German reaction was given, but any reactions that were in dialect were fully accepted. The reactions were, of course, written down in the form in which they were given. To subjects who had never taken part in such experiments, their significance was first explained in practical examples of how they had to react were demonstrated to them. Not a few of the uneducated subjects thought it was a kind of question and answer game, the point of which was to find an appropriate word connection to stimulus words: house, house cat, wild, wildcat. The experiments were never started till it was certain that the subjects understood the experiment. We stress that a case of not understanding never occurred, and that general lack of intelligence was much less disturbing than effects, particularly a fairly frequent emotional obtuseness. Let's see. Let me see that again. We stress that a case of not understanding never occurred. So they always understood. And that general lack of intelligence was much less disturbing than effects. Than affects, particularly a fairly frequent emotional obtuseness. Being emotionally obtuse. Pretending not to understand emotions? Okay. Or pretending or faking your emotions? It is of some significance that many of the uneducated came in with a certain schoolroom attitude and a certain correct and stiff demeanor. So the uneducated people who took part in the experiment felt a little bit self-conscious and acted like they were in school, like students to teachers, because maybe they were a little bit intimidated by the situation. We organized our experiments as follows. The 200 reactions were noted without further conditions. The reaction time was measured with a 1/5 second stopwatch, which we started on the accented syllable of the stimulus word and stopped on the uttering of the reaction. We do not, of course, presume to have in any way measured complicated psychological times by this simple procedure. We were merely concerned with establishing a general idea of a roughly average reaction time, which is in many cases not without importance, being very often of value in the classification of reactions. So they felt like the reaction times showed something very important. After 200 reactions, these were as far as possible classified with the help of the subjects. With educated subjects, this was always done. With uneducated subjects, who only rarely have any capacity for introspection, it was, of course, impossible. We had to limit ourselves to having the connection explained in particularly striking associations. The results of the experiment were divided into a first and second 100, and these were written down separately during the experiment. During the experiment, the psychic state of the subject was as far as possible established, both objectively and subjectively. If for any reason physiological fatigue occurred, we waited till the next day before doing the second experimental series. With the educated subjects, fatigue almost never occurred during the first experiment, so that we could continue at once with the second series in nearly every case. The second series of experiments consisted of 100 reactions, which were recorded under the condition of internal distraction. The subject was asked to concentrate his attention as much as possible on the so-called A phenomenon, and at the same time to react as quickly as possible, with the same promptness as in the first experiment. By the A phenomenon, we understand, with chords, the sum of those psychological phenomena that are directly stimulated by the perception of acoustic stimulus. So they were giving some kind of sound distraction. To establish whether the subject had observed the A phenomenon, we had occasionally to describe it after the reaction. So this was noted, and this was noted. On completion of this experiment, new classifications were again made, of course. For this experiment, only educated people could be used, and of these, unfortunately, only a selection, because it takes a certain psychological training to be able to observe attentively one's own psychic phenomenon. I hope they're going to explain this a little bit more later because I'm not sure what this means. So in the second experiment, they had the A phenomenon. And then they did the word association. So they were distracting them, it sounds like, with some kind of sound. And they're concentrating on the sound, but then they also have to try to do the word association. I think that's what they're saying, but I'm not sure. The third experimental series was sometimes not carried out till the second day. It consisted of 100 reactions and was based on the condition of external distraction. The distraction in this experiment was brought about by the following way. The subject had to make pencil marks of about 1 centimeter in time with a metronome. The beat of the first 50 reactions was 60 per minute, and for the second 50 reactions, 100 per minute. The classification results of the first 50 reactions and the second 50 were recorded separately, and for the ease of calculation, brought to 100. With a very few subjects, the metronome was speeded up at every 25th reaction in order to exclude an all too quick habituation. The beat was, in these cases, increased from 60 to 72 and from 100 to 108. So it sounds like they kept adding more distractions and then having the word association included in those distractions, hoping to get a more interesting response. And even with the metronome, they sometimes varied the speed to avoid the person getting into a sort of rhythm. All right, I'm just going to take a 1-minute break and I will be right back. Okay, let's get back to this. The factor of habituation, in any case, unfortunately plays a large part in these experiments, as one would expect. So I think what they mean by that is the rhythm of the metronome is kind of hypnotic. Many people very quickly get used to a purely mechanical activity in which, in the second phase of the experiment, only the beat changes. It's difficult to induce other disturbing stimuli of equal continuity and variability without inducing word images, particularly when one does not wish to make too great demands on the intelligence and willpower of the subject. Let me just read that again. It's difficult to induce other disturbing stimuli of equal continuity and variability without inducing So I think he's saying it's hard to make these little changes without also influencing the associations. In trying to find a suitable disturbing stimulus, we were above all intent on excluding that which might have had an excitatory effect on verbal imagery. We think we did exclude such effects by our experimental procedure. Yeah, so they wanted to introduce changes, but not changes that would affect their reactions. From these experiments, 300 to 400 associations on average were obtained from every subject. We also tried to supplement our material in other directions in order to obtain a certain connection with Aschenberg's results. And for this purpose, we took associations from some of our subjects in a condition of obvious fatigue. We were able to obtain such reactions from 6 subjects. For this purpose, we took association from some of our subjects in a condition, so they purposely looked at people who were tired or who were exhausted. And they were able to find 6 people in that kind of state. Associations were also taken from one subject in a state of morning sleepiness after a night of undisturbed sleep, and in which the factor of fatigue was completely excluded. With one subject, associations were taken when he was in a state of acute moodiness, irritability, without fatigue. So they kept trying to find different ways to do word association. Tired people, angry people, annoyed people, sleepy people. In this way, we obtained about 12,400 associations. Anyone with practical experience of work on association has been confronted with the difficult and unrewarding task of classifying the results of the experiments. On the whole, we agree with Cordes when he says that in earlier association experiments, the false assumption prevailed that the fundamental psychological phenomenon corresponds to the stimulus word, and that the connection between the stimulus word and reaction is an association. Let me read that again. The false assumption prevailed that the fundamental psychological phenomenon corresponds to the stimulus word. And the connection between the stimulus word and the reaction is an association. This somewhat too simple interpretation is at the same time too pretentious, for it maintains that in the connection between 2 linguistic signs, there is also a psychological connection. Okay, so earlier, when talking about word association, they were saying that actually the connection between the 2 words is psychological. And he's saying, no, it's not psychological. Or it could be psychological or partly psychological, but maybe that's not all it is, because you can't just assume that 2 linguistic signs have a psychological connection. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. We do not, of course, share this point of view, but see in the stimulus word merely the stimulus in the strict sense of the word, and in the reaction merely as a symptom of psychological process, the nature of which we cannot judge. We do not, therefore, claim that the reactions we describe are associations in the strictest sense. We even wonder if it would not be altogether better to drop the word association and instead talk about linguistic reaction. So instead of saying, if you say apple and somebody says red, instead of thinking of that as an association, apples are red, it means it's just an involuntary reaction. For the external connection between stimulus word and reaction is far too crude to give an absolutely exact picture of these extraordinarily complicated processes, the associations proper. Reactions represent the psychological connection only in remote and imperfect ways. So instead of reading too much into it, I think what he's saying is it's just a reaction. You say apple, then you say red. And that's the reaction that you have. And reading too much into it maybe is a bad idea. I think that's what he's saying. But then I also guess that's what they always do, right? With word association, they read all kinds of things into it. So I'm not sure. Thus, when describing and classifying linguistically expressed connections, we are not then classifying the actual associations, but merely their objective symptoms, from which psychological connections can be reconstructed only with caution. So the first thing that you have to do is look at it on the surface and say, one person says apple, that person says red, and that's it. And then maybe later you can read into it with more information and other things. I think that's what he's saying. I don't know. Only in psychologically educated subjects is the reaction what it really should be, namely the reproduction of the next idea. In all others, a distinct tendency to construct something is mixed with the reaction, so that in many cases it is the product of deliberation, a whole series of associations. Only in psychologically educated people is the reaction really what it should be, namely the reproduction of the next idea. In all others, a distinct tendency to construct something is mixed. So is he saying that with most people there's a temptation to invent something, to try to be something, so that in many cases it is a product of deliberation like thinking. So apple, oh my god, what should I say, what should I think? Red, like that. I think that's what he means by that. A whole series of associations. In our association experiments, we stimulate the language apparatus. The more one-sided the stimulus is, the greater the number of linguistic connections that will appear in the reaction. The more one-sided the stimulus is, the greater the number of linguistic connections that will appear in the reaction. The more one-sided the stimulus is, the greater the number of linguistic connections. As we shall see, this is mainly the case with educated subjects, from whom a finer differentiation of psychological mechanisms and therefore greater ability for isolated application can a priori be expected. One must therefore guard against the fallacious assumption that the educated subject has in any way more external associations of ideas than uneducated. The difference will be a psychological one, as in educated subjects, other psychological factors insinuate themselves. In the second part of this paper, we shall refer to this difference. From whom the finer differentiation of psychological mechanisms and therefore greater ability for isolated application can a priori be expected. One must therefore guard against the fallacious assumption that the educated subject has in any way more external associations of ideas than the uneducated. So both educated and uneducated have reactions. They're not necessarily more, they don't have, an educated person doesn't have more associations, but deeper associations. Is that what he's saying? Because it says in other psychological factors insinuate themselves. The difference will be a psychological one. As in uneducated subjects, well, they're just different, I think is what he's saying. They're just different reactions. Huh. Okay. As long as we still know so little about the connection between psychic events, we must refrain from formulating principles for a classification of external phenomenon from inner psychic data. As long as we still know so little about the connection between psychic events, we must refrain from formulating the principles for a classification of external phenomenon from inner psychic data. We have therefore confined ourselves to a simple logical classification, to which, as a precaution, it is in our view essential to limit oneself, till we are able to derive empirical laws from psychic associations. The logical principles of classification must also be adapted to the special experimental conditions, that is, to the verbal reaction. We must therefore, in classifying the associations, take into account not only the logical quality, but also, if possible, those external circumstances occurring as a result of this particular experimental design. So they have to consider or think about the environment in which the experiment is taking place. The use of the linguistic acoustic brain mechanism naturally is not without influence on the associations. The purely intrapsychic association cannot become the object of another's consciousness without being transformed into the familiar symbolism of language. The purely intrapsychic association cannot become the object of another's consciousness without being transformed into the familiar symbolism of language. Thus, a completely new element is added to simple association, which exerts a great influence on the latter. In the first place, the results will be determined by the subject's verbal facility. James Mill's generally valid law of frequency directs the reaction even more selectively towards what is accustomed to. Thus, one of the chief principles of our classification will be that of verbal facility. We proceeded with the classification of associations essentially according to the Kreplin, why can't I say that name? Kreplin Aschenfenberg scheme. We preferred this system to others because, in our opinion, it is heuristically the most valuable. When Ziehen describes the Kreplin Aschenfenberg attempt at classification as a failure, this is surely a rather strong term. No one will maintain that Aschenfenberg's classification is exhausted. Ziehen would not want to claim that even for his own. Ziehen's classification has certainly opened up most valuable vistas, but it itself not completely satisfactory. First of all, the differentiation between jumping association and judgment association is a very doubtful one. So I wonder what jumping association is. Is that just saying what comes to mind? And then judgment association, well, I don't know. Hopefully they explain some of these things later on. If it is completely dependent on the presence or absence of the copula, a fact which Claparade also strongly criticizes. What's a copula? Let's see. I haven't had much luck defining any of these words. Copula. A connecting word, in particular form of a verb be connecting a subject and a complement. How are they using that here? If it is completely dependent on the presence or absence of the copula, the verb to be, a verb, a connecting word, a fact which Claparade also strongly criticizes. The complete failure of Aschenberg's schema should first be proved, but this is in fact not been done. On the contrary, the results based on this classification are very encouraging, so that at present one can still venture to use it, although bearing in mind its one-sidedness. The other schemas of classification are, however, biased in other ways. The criticism of Aschenberg's schema is biased on the side of logic, is not valid, as it makes sufficient allowance for logical data as well as for sensual and perceptual connection, and also for the linguistic factor faced with reactions in the form of sentences. However, the schema is more or less powerless. On the other hand, it must be stressed that with normal subjects, sentences occur very rarely. One factor of great practical significance deserves to be stressed. Aschenberg's schema has been tested on a great deal of material, part of it pathological, and has proved itself of value. His conditio sine qua non is not, let's see. I'm going to translate that. Conditio sine qua non. What does that mean? Latin term translate condition without which not. In English, it is a legal and philosophical concept used to denote an indispensable or essential condition or factor that is necessary for a particular result or outcome. So, his conditio sine qua non is not, what is it? I'd like to read this again. Let's see. On the other hand, it must be stressed that with normal subjects, sentences occur very rarely. One factor of great practical significance deserves to be stressed. Aschenberg's schema has not been tested on a great deal of material. Part of it, pathological, has proved itself of value. His conditio sine qua non is not the subsequent questioning of the subjects about the reaction phenomenon, as in the schemas of Ziehen, Meyer, and Oort, and Claparade. It also allows at least an approximately correct classification. Well, what is his requirement? What is this thing that he needs? I have to go back and read again. Let's see. Are, however, biased. The criticism that Aschenberg's schema is biased on the side of logic. Well, what is his schema? Let's go back. We proceeded with the classification of associations essentially according to the Kraepelin-Aschenberg scheme. We preferred this system to others because, in our opinion, it is heuristically the most valuable. When Ziehen describes the Kraepelin-Aschenberg's attempt at classification as a failure, where do they mention it? I'm going way back to find it. Simple logical classification. Oh wait, as long as we still know so little about the connection between psychic events, we must refrain from formulating principles for a classification of external phenomenon from inner psychic data. We have therefore confined ourselves to a simple logical classification. So they're trying not to interpret things too much, to which, as a precaution, it is in our view essential to limit oneself till we are able to derive empirical laws from psychic associations. The logical principles of classification must also be adapted to the special experimental conditions, that is, to the verbal reaction. We must therefore, in classifying the associations, take into account not only the logical quality, but also, if possible, all those external circumstances occurring as a result of this particular experimental design. The use of the linguistic acoustic brain mechanism naturally is not without influence on the associations. The purely intrapsychic association cannot become the object of another's consciousness without being transformed. Thus, a completely new element is added to simple association, which exerts a great influence on the latter. In the first place, the results will be determined by the subject's verbal facility. James Mill's generally valid law of frequency directs the reaction even more selectively towards what one is accustomed to. Thus, of the chief principles of our classification will be that of verbal facility. We proceeded with the classification of associations essentially according to the Kraepelin-Aschenfenberg scheme, which, if I think they just mentioned it, is that not to read too much into things, just to try to be very logical about these reactions. And that's what I'm interpreting it. I'm not going back and reading it again, but that's what I think. We preferred this system to others because, in our opinion, it is heuristically the most valuable. When Ziehen describes the Kraepelin-Aschenfenberg attempt at classification as a failure, this is surely rather a strong term. No one will maintain that Aschenfenberg's classification is exhaustive. I'm just going to... I wonder what happens if I ask ChatGPT what the Kraepelin-Aschenfenberg classification is. What do we get? ChatGPT says, I don't know. It was a German Emil Kraepelin was a German psychiatrist known for his work in the late 19th and 20th centuries, particularly for his influential contributions to the classification of psychiatric disorders, such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. However, a specific collaboration or classification system with Aschenfenberg is not part of the information available to me. Wait, what if we say scheme, word association? No, ChatGPT says, I don't know. Okay. Oh well, maybe we'll figure it out as we go. The other schemas of classification are, however, biased in other ways. The criticism that Aschenfenberg's schema is biased on the side of logic is not valid, as it makes sufficient allowance for logical data as well as for sensual and perceptual connection, and also for the linguistic factor. Faced with reactions in the form of sentences, however, the schema is more or less powerless. On the other hand, it must be stressed that with normal subjects, sentences occur very rarely. So they do word associations and you blurt out a word. You don't say a sentence. Aschenfenberg's schema has been tested on a great deal of material. Part of it, pathological, has proved itself of value. His conditio sine qua non, so that his big requirement, the thing that is all based upon or hinges upon, is not the subsequent questioning of the subjects about the reaction phenomenon, as in, okay, maybe the answer was here all along. So his requirement is not the subsequent questioning of the subjects about the reaction, as in the schemas of Ziehen, Meyer, and Orth, and Claparede. It also allows at least an approximately correct classification without the help of the subject. Oh, okay, so I think what they're saying is that when some people are doing word association, they go through the list of words and the associations, and then they go back and talk about it with the person who did the reactions. But with the Asche-Feinberg Kreplin system, you don't do that. You just gather the information and then you do something with it, which is of particular importance in psychopathological experiments. So especially with people with problems, it's maybe makes more sense to just take the information and not talk to them about it or discuss it with them, but to draw your own conclusions. Okay, I think I'm pretty confident that's what it means. Okay, as we regard this work merely as a preliminary to psychopathological experiments, we have not hesitated to give preference to Asche-Feinberg's schema. So he prefers this way of just gathering the information and then interpreting it later yourself without much help from the person who had the reactions. Those of Münsterberg and Bourdon appear to us as too much weighted on the side of logic. Zihen's criticism of these, that they are unpsychological because they abstract completely from the context, is valid. Claparede's extremely subtle and penetrating suggestion does, however, deserve serious consideration, but should perhaps first be used on a wider range of material to test its application in practice. In attempting the classification of acoustic verbal associations, one must never forget that one is not examining images, but their verbal symbols. So he's saying, which is never what I thought this was that you're not making the association between what the word represents and the person's reaction, but on the sounds that are made, or what the sounds represent. Okay, the examination of associations is an indirect one and is susceptible to numerous sources of errors caused by great complexity of the process. In our experiments, we examine the resultant of an appreciable number of psychological processes of perception, apperception, intrapsychic association, and verbal comprehension. So perception, let's see, what is apperception? What you don't perceive? Let's see. Apperception. Apperception refers to a process of mentally assimilating new information or experiences into one's existing cognitive framework. It involves not just perceiving stimuli, but also interpreting and incorporating them into one's existing understanding of knowledge. Apperception is an important concept in psychology and philosophy, particularly in understanding how individuals make sense and interact with the world around them. In psychological terms, apperception involves the integration of new information with pre-existing cognitive structures, schemas, or mental frameworks. So how you incorporate new things into your mind. It's closely related to the concept of perception, but goes beyond mere sensation to encompass the active process of understanding and making meaning of what is perceived. So it's like processing. Perceiving and then processing is apperception. Okay, so in our experiments, we examine the resultant of appreciable number of psychological processes of perception, so what you take in, apperception, how you process or interpret it, intrapsychic association. Does that mean how you relate to other people? Let's see. Let's ask. Intrapsychic. Intrapsychic. Let's see. Intrapsychic refers to processes, phenomena, or dynamics that occur within the mind. Oh, intra, not inter. Intra, yeah. So how things are connected inside the mind of an individual. It involves the internal mental and emotional processes that take place within one's own mind. The prefix intra means within or inside, and the word psychic pertains to the mind or mental processes. Okay. So in our experiments, we examine the resultant of an appreciable number of psychological processes of perception, so taking in the information, apperception, how you incorporate it, intrapsychic association, how these things react inside the mind or how they're connected inside the mind, verbal comprehension, so how you understand the words, and motor expression, so also maybe kind of body language, I guess would be another way of saying motor expression. Each of these activities leaves its traces in the reaction. In view of the great psychological significance of motility, what is motility? Is that like an old word for mobility? Motility. Oh boy. Motility refers to the ability or capacity of an organism, cell, or fluid to move, exhibit movement in biological contexts. Okay, so it's kind of like mobility. Each of these activities leaves its traces in the reaction. In view of the great psychological significance of motility, particularly of speech function, one must attribute, above all, a main role to linguistic facility. It is mainly this factor that is to be considered in classification. This principle of classification can be criticized for introducing an extremely variable and indeterminable magnitude into the calculation. We must admit that verbal facility is an extremely variable magnitude. I've been wondering what they mean by verbal facility, because this word facile means easy. So does that mean like easy to understand words, easy to express words, both? I'm not sure what they mean by verbal facility. So verbal facility is an extremely variable magnitude, and that in an actual case it often causes difficulties, and that therefore the logical character of the classification also suffers. It introduces an arbitrary element into the classification that one would like to avoid. So are they talking about people not understanding certain words or not being able to express themselves accurately? I'm not sure. But for the reasons stated above, we have nevertheless, faute de mieux, decided, we have to look that up, faute de mieux, what does that mean? Faute de mieux, faute de mieux. Want of a better alternative. Yeah, so mieux, maybe mieux is better, missing something better, I guess. So, but for the reasons stated above, we have nevertheless faute de mieux, something, so for want of a better word, decided, or for want of something better, decided on this mode of classification. So there's nothing better. So they're just using this particular classification, taking as a guiding line certain empirical rules that we shall discuss later. By these restrictions and thorough consideration of the subject, we hope to have avoided being arbitrary in applying this principle. The following nomenclature, flight of ideas, associations, it must be remembered after what has just been said, that by this we mean primarily speech phenomena from which we have allowed ourselves to make deductions about psychological events. Here we are fully aware that we are examining a relatively limited area, that is, associations that are for the most part reflected in the speech mechanism. Thus we speak of the flight of ideas. We mean by this the speech phenomenon, that an external manifestation of internal processes. Of course, the psychological event is not necessarily reflected in toto in the form of word associations, but is only expressed in linguistic signs of the type when it affects the speech mechanism. In the flight of ideas, the actual thinking would naturally present a totally different picture. So they're saying flight of ideas when they say that. All they're saying is that they notice something physical happening, and they're trying to connect that with something psychologically. But in the flight of ideas, the actual thinking would naturally represent a totally different picture if it could manifest itself directly. So he's saying we can't really know what's happening inside of the mind, just that there was some kind of physical signal that there was a flight of ideas. I think that's what he's saying. Thus, for example, the flight of ideas resulting from predominantly visual parts of the images constitutes a special aspect that can hardly manifest itself adequately enough, and is therefore hardly accessible to external examination. Particularly in mania, it will, as a rule, not be accessible to examination because of the linguistic agitation. We shall find an opportunity in later publication to discuss the visual form of the flight of ideas. So I think he's just saying we have to be careful because well, now he's talking about people with problems like mania. So they're all over the place. So it's really hard to, what did he say in particular? It was a rule, it will as a rule not be accessible to examination. Because their thoughts are all over the place, they're not focused, so you can't really interpret that as anything else but mania. So I think he's just saying we have to be careful and record what we see and not read too much into it. That seems to be what he's saying most of the time. Could be very wrong about this. I don't know. All right, so now we're going to start 2, special classification. But before we do that, I'm just going to take a 1-minute break. Okay, we're back. I was just thinking while I was getting something to drink that you don't realize how little you understand of something you read, especially when it's complicated like this, until you try to put it in simpler terms for somebody else. And then you realize this is very complicated. So it's pretty hard reading. Okay, let's keep going. Maybe as we go, we'll get better at interpreting all of this. So, number 2, special classification. A, internal association. A, grouping. We classify under this heading all associations connected by coordination, superordination, subordination, or contrast. The perusal of the cases in question leads to the following special classification of coordinations. So coordination, things that act together. Superordination, things that control other things. Subordination, things that are controlled. Or contrast, how things are different. So if you're talking about association, coordination probably is things that have an obvious connection to each other, things that go together. Superordination, things that go above other things. Subordination, things under other things. Or contrast, things that are different. The perusal of the cases in question leads to the following special classification of coordinations. A, coordination. The two parts are linked by similarity. Oh, good. He's going to explain it. That's better. I'm happy about that. The two parts are linked by similarity of content or nature, i.e., a general idea in which both parts are contained underlies them. Examples. Let me just make sure that you can see this. Okay. So here are some examples of coordination. Accumulation of water, lake, ocean, or fruit, cherry, apple, or measurement, long, narrow. I guess obvious connections, right? Injustice or vice, unjust, faithlessness. Association by coordination must take place within the framework of a clear-cut common general concept, but may be the result of more or less vague similarity. The similarity may be very great, so that only a nuance prevents it from being identical, to forbear leniency. The similarity can also be very remote, so that the common meaning of the two concepts is not an essential one, but a more or less coincidental attribute of the stimulus image. In such cases, the reaction appears very loosely connected with the stimulus word, and thus is distinguished from other coordinations. The distance of the association is, as it were, greater. Therefore, these coordinations can to some extent be separated from those already discussed. In the loosely connected associations, two categories can be distinguished. The stimulus image is linked to the reaction by a meaningful but otherwise coincidental attribute. Father, worried, worry, play of child, youth. War, Peace League, Bertha versus Suttner. What is that? Bertha v. Suttner. Oh, there's a footnote here. Where's no, that I don't know where the footnote is. I'm just going to search Bertha v. Suttner to see what that is. I think it was, I was listening to somebody who was talking about Jung, and oh, I can't remember his name now. Terence. Oh, I don't know. I'll think of it later. But he got really interested in Jung, and then the thing that interested him most, he said that all the interesting things about Jung are in the footnotes. Wait, Bertha v. Suttner. So that kind of got my attention that I should always be Bertha von Suttner. I thought it was a court case, Bertha v. Suttner, but it's a German name. Bertha von Suttner was an Austro-Bohemian noblewoman, pacifist, and novelist. Okay, so she was a pacifist. So war, and then the association is Bertha von Suttner, who was a pacifist who protested war. Murderer, to hang, gallows. Sentence, contains something, content. Star, romantic night, romanticism. So these are very loose connections, but they're related. They're all related somehow, even if they're loose. The stimulus image is linked to the reaction by an unessential, external, mostly quasi-coexistent attribute. Pencil, long, length. Sky, blue, color. Sea, deep, depth. Table, particular shape, style. These two modes of coordination may be called the connection of images according to internal or external kinship. The first category contains by far more significant coordinations and justifies to some extent the terms internal and external. The coexistence of attributes in the second category indicates that the formation of those coordinations is due to external association. As a last category of coordination, we should like to propose coordination through example. This category primarily contains reactions that are nothing but the inversions of the two previously discussed patterns. So let's see, worry, father, worry of the father, content, sentence, content of the sentence, color, sky, of the sky, misery. So wait, I'm just going to read that definition again. As a last category of coordination, we should like to propose coordination through example. So you give the word worry. Here's an example of worrying of a father. You give the word content. Here's an example of something with content, a sentence. You give the word color. Here's an example of something with color, the sky. Okay. Now, there is a series of reactions to adjectives and verbs which, although it is true that they are not grammatically coordinated to the stimulus word, can nevertheless perhaps best be grouped with coordinations, particularly those of the examples. To pay attention, clever man. To despise, wickedness. Foreign, emigrant. To pay, pious man. To help, good man. What did he call these? I'm going to read that again. Now there is a series of reactions to adjectives and verbs, which, although it is true that they are not grammatically coordinated to the stimulus word, can nevertheless perhaps be grouped with coordinations, particularly those of the examples of to give in, peace-loving, to pay attention, clever man. Okay. These associations can, if the expression be permitted, be called analytical. They are connections that are given, so to speak, implicitly with the stimulus word to which they have been subordinated or superordinated. But as it is difficult, when they talk about superordination and subordination, I think they're talking about the position of the word. Does it go in front or does it go behind? If not impossible to distinguish this relationship with certainty in concrete cases, as in addition to the concept of the whole and the part cannot be applied to adjectives and verbs, we count these reactions as a coordination. Wait, let me read that again. To distinguish this relationship without certainty in concrete cases, and as in addition, the concept of the whole and the part cannot be applied to adjectives and verbs. We count these reactions as coordination through example, inasmuch as among the possible nouns, certain typical ones always appear in the reactions. The reactions in these cases are always extremely general and closely dependent on the stimulus word. The special classification of the coordinations would then be as follows. By common general concept, number 1. Number 2, by similarity. Number 3, by internal relationship. Number 4, by external relationship. And 5, by example. Examples. So number 1, father, uncle. Okay, so I guess that's common general concept. So father is one relationship, male relationship. Uncle is another male relationship. 2, by similarity. So we have father again, and then similarity, God. Number 3, by internal relationship. Father, worry, something that happens inside the father. Number 4, external relationship. Father, our house. We share the house. Number 5, by example. Pay attention. Clever man. Okay, I wonder why he didn't give an example of father and example. That's interesting. I wonder what that means. It must be added that with these examples, the rich variety of coordinations is by no means exhausted. With individuals who associate intensively, according to subjective constellations, a whole series of different coordinations, which cannot really be placed in any of these categories, is possible. In these cases, one can safely admit one's ability and simply content oneself with the classification coordination. One can console oneself with the idea that the individual possibilities are innumerable and that no schema could ever be invented that would make possible a clear-cut classification of all associations. So these are just some very basic ways of giving examples of coordination, but the possibilities are endless. But there is a number of coordinations that could, without undue strain, be placed under different headings, i.e., they have no clearly defined character. One can either leave it at that or perhaps group these reactions with the type they most resemble. The headings set out above are not meant to be absolute, compulsory categories, but merely a name for empirically found types, which on occasion, however, may merge into each other without sharp boundaries. More must not be expected in our present state of knowledge of association. So these are just examples. There are many ways to classify coordinations, and sometimes it's not even clear which kind of coordination is given. Next, we have subordination. The reaction is considered as a part or a minor subordinated concept to the stimulus word. Okay, so it isn't about word placement, it is about relationships. So subordinate would be under. For example, tree, if the word is tree and the reaction is beach, that's a type of tree. It's a subordinate response. Here we include all reactions that specify the stimulus word, i.e., that represent special instances of the general stimulus concept. So, for example, the word house, house on X Street. Horse, Mr. X's horse. Railway station, Baden. In some cases, there may be doubt whether the association should be considered as subordination or as predicate. For example, food. Today's food. Okay, I don't really get that. Superordination. This reaction is considered as the whole or general concept of the stimulus word. So Ofen, town. So that's like one step up. Ofen is the name of a town. You say town. Cat. Animal, one classification up. Superordination. Here too, the separation from the predicate is difficult. 13, unlucky number. Is unlucky number in this case a general concept, as such includes 13 with other unlucky numbers? In our opinion, this is a predicate here. On the other hand, we would include Asche-Fanberg's association baptism ancient custom as a superordination. Superordination. As ancient custom is a general concept that includes many other subordinate concepts. Contrast. The concept can be understood without difficulty. The classification and evaluation of the contrasts is much more difficult. However, contrasts are as a rule very closely associated images, not only conceptually, but also perceptually, and above all, linguistically. There are even languages in which only one and the same word exists to express typical contrasts. It must have been a considerable psychic achievement in the beginning of language and conspicuous thought to separate contrasts in speech and concept. Today, however, we have these ancient achievements in thought already formulated in the language. They are taught to us from earliest youth together with the first concepts of speech, with the first songs and reading material. We are verbally practiced in these closely connected concepts, which are very often supported by quotations and rhymes. Sorrow, joy, pain, pleasure, good, bad, sour, sweet, light, dark. Sauersüß and Helldunkel are even colloquial words in German. For these reasons, we have grouped a large number of common contrasts with external associations. I don't know what Sauersüß or Helldunkel are. Let's see. Here we only count associations that are not current, such as friendly, angry, good, sinful, animal, plant, sense, stupidity, vengeance, to forgive. In spite of this detailed classification of groupings, there are still associations that cannot be put into any of the subgroups. For these, there remains simply the general term coordination. The association high, silk. The stimulus word high, German, hoch, has been understood as a proper name. The bearer of this name, hoch, has a silk shop, hence the reaction, silk. This cannot be merely a case of coexistence. The reaction consists of two specific images that are spatially coexistent. It is therefore a rather complicated formation. One could perhaps place it under the heading coordination through external connection. Though admittedly, on slight evidence, therefore, it is safest for the moment to admit that such coordination cannot be further classified. Summarizing, we arrive at the following schema. Coordination by a general concept, by similarity, by internal relationship, by external relationship, by example. Subordination, actual subordination, specification. Superordination, so that's one step higher instead of one step lower, or steps higher instead of steps lower. Contrast, differences, groupings of doubtful quality. All right, predicate. We include here in agreement with Asche-Fanberg all judgments, properties, and activities that in any way refer to the stimulus concept as a subject or object. Summarized by Kraepelin under the name predicative relationships. It is well known that Kant divides judgments into analytic and synthetic. I wonder where all these footnotes are. What happens? Oh, I hope if I click on this. Oh no, I'm not going to click on the footnote because it's on page 1168, and I don't know if I can get back to. Oh wait, let's see. Okay, let's see what happens. Here we go. In analytical judgment. Wait, let's see. If I click on 15, does it go back? Oh, good. Okay, we're safe. Yeah, let's read the footnotes. I just remembered Terence McKenna. He's the one who said he got turned on to Jung when he was a teenager. He did a lot of psychedelic experiments. And the thing that he loved about Jung was reading the footnotes. So I don't want to ignore the footnotes because I think that maybe, well, according to Terence McKenna, who was a pretty smart guy, he always said that the Jung's footnotes are very interesting. So I don't want to ignore these. So let's see. In an analytical judgment, I do not go beyond the given conception in order to arrive at some decision respecting it. If the judgment is affirmative, I predicate of the conception only that which is cogitated in it. Oh my goodness. Okay, wait, let's see. In analytical judgment, I do not go beyond the given conception. So don't go beyond what is presented, I guess, is what he's saying, in order to arrive at some decision to respecting it. So when you're doing an analytical judgment, you just have to look at what is in front of you, I think is what he's saying. If the judgment is affirmative, I predicate of the conception only that which is already. What does cogitated mean? I have to look this up. Cogitated. Think deeply about something, meditate or reflect on something. Let's see. So if the judgment is affirmative, I predicate of the conception only that which was already cogitated in it. Like only that which was presented, maybe, for me to think about. If negative, I merely exclude from the conception its contrary. But in synthetical judgments, I must go beyond given conception. So in a synthetical judgment, you have to make connections that aren't presented in front of you in order to cogitate, to think about it, to contemplate it. In relation with it, something quite different from that which was cogitated in it. Oh my, that is such very complicated language. Okay. But I think what that means is when you're doing analytical judgment, you're presented with things and you have to just look at those things and make a decision based on what you see or based on what evidence you can see. But in synthetical judgment, you can play with the ideas more. I think that's what he's saying. Well, if you understand it better, please leave comments. Let me know. Let me know how wrong I am. Tell me. Okay. So this principle, I think it just means observing things. This principle of logical classification is of value to us only insofar as an analytic judgment, as part of the concept, predicate, is presented that is necessarily inherent in the concept. Thus, only that is given which already implicitly exists. But in synthetic judgment, something is added to the concept that is not necessarily already contained in the concept. As regards associative performance, the synthetic judgment is in a way superior to the analytic. So if you're doing analytic association, all you do is examine what you're presented with. But if you're doing a synthetic analysis, you can maybe draw conclusions or go beyond what was presented to you. I guess you could be more creative with a synthetic analysis. or a synthetic judgment. So a synthetic judgment is in a way superior to the analytic. If we approach this question practically, we find, insofar as this method of classification can in practice be applied at all, that in simple judgment reactions, the analytic judgment exists mainly in the naming of a coexistent perceptible attribute. So maybe that's like classifying the association according to these different ways the words are connected. While the synthetic judgment is mostly a value judgment with a more or less marked ego reference. Thus, we see here a relationship analogous to that between coordination by external relationship and coordination by internal relationship. So in the association pencil length, length is essentially contained in the concept or is coexistent, while father worry, the concept worry, adds something new and therefore causes a shifting concept. So you could see it's very logical that if somebody says pencil, then they say length. And I guess that would be, what did he call it? There's a synthetic judgment and what was the other one? Analytic judgment. So I guess pencil length is kind of an analytic judgment, whereas father worry is more of a synthetic judgment. The concept worry adds something new and therefore causes a shifting of concept. We should readily accept the grouping of judgment reactions into analytic and synthetic if there were not a considerable practical difficulty. We have no way of knowing, in the individual case, whether the analytic predicate is an essential part of the concept or not. One can only attempt to decide this question if one can differentiate in individual cases between a concrete and an abstract concept. We know that Ziehen considers that he has done this by a direct questioning, even of children. We not only consider this method most unreliable, but also find the distinction between concrete and abstract concepts particularly difficult. So if somebody says pencil and then they say long, or if they say father and they say worry, you don't really know, without understanding their experiences in that person, whether this is an analytical judgment or a synthetic judgment. And one way that you could find that out is by questioning them or talking to them about it, but that could be pretty unreliable. If I give a name to a mental picture, and then the picture consists of a condensation of many memories, whose more concrete or more abstract aspect depends on minimal differences of perceptual vividness, in many cases, even psychologically educated people would be at a loss if they had to decide whether, for example, house, roof, they had visualized a concrete or abstract roof. Of course, we are far from denying the existence of abstract concepts, but in concrete cases of acoustic verbal experiments, we cannot help suspecting that the so-called abstract concepts are merely words that lack individual content. Only not so much because they are abstract concepts as they are mostly linguistic formations of a motor kind in which the other sense impressions participate only very slightly. But in concrete cases of acoustic verbal experiments, we cannot help suspecting that so-called abstract concepts are merely words that lack individual context. So it's just like a reaction. Only not so much because they are abstract concepts as that they are mostly linguistic formations of a motor kind. So It's just a physical reaction. When somebody says house, you say roof, in which the other senses impressions participate only very slightly. For the answer to the question whether we are faced with an analytic or a synthetic judgment, we should have to know exactly whether the thought was concrete or abstract. Snake green is objectively entirely synthetic. It's not necessary to think of green together with snake. Well, what if you grow up around green snakes all the time? Then you always would think of green with snake. It's not necessary to think of green together with snake. Only in the case of the image of a definite snake must green be already implicit, in which case it would be an analytic judgment. Apart from these reservations, there are other mainly practical difficulties which interdict this mode of classification. In order to arrive at a special classification of the predicate, we must consider the different possibilities. Number one, the stimulus word is a noun, the reaction an adjective. Number two, the stimulus is an adjective, the reaction a noun. We have no reason to separate these two cases any more than other forms of predicative connection. The stimulus word is the subject, the reaction, its active or passive activity. The stimulus word is the subject, the reaction, its active or passive activity. Number two, the stimulus word is the active or passive activity of the reaction. Or, number three, the stimulus word is the object, the reaction is the activity referring to it. Well, I just want to play with this for a minute. The stimulus word is the subject. The reaction is the active or passive activity. So, reactive or passive activity. So if you say dog, bark, that would be an active activity. Or dog, pet. Let's see, the stimulus word is the active or passive activity of the reaction. So bark, dog. Maybe like that, I think. The stimulus word is the object. The reaction is the activity referring to it. So the stimulus word is the object and the reaction is the activity referring to it. So cake, eat. The stimulus word is an activity. The reaction is its object. So eat cake. Okay, I'm thinking about cake. Let us consider the first forms, the predicative connection of, oh good, they're going to go into detail. Okay. The predicative connection of noun and adjective. Two main possibilities are to be distinguished. The adjective describes an essential and internally meaningful characteristic of the stimulus image. One can call this type of predicate internal. It can easily be divided by two groups. Judgment. Here's objective judgment. Snake, poisonous. So that's an internal quality of the snake. Glass, fragile. That's an internal quality of the glass. Mild, spring. Thirst, intense. So these are qualities contained inside the word. War, bloody. Grandmother, old. Winter, raw. These predicates describe an essential and meaningful addition to the stimulus. Their purely objective character distinguishes them from the second group. These predicates describe an essential and meaningful addition to the stimulus. Their purely objective character distinguishes them from the second group, value judgment. Father, good. Stink, unpleasant. ride, dangerous, mountain, beautiful, book, interesting, pupil, good, soldier, brave, wood, useful, murderer, base, water, refreshing. In these reactions, the personal element is more or less prominent, but where the ego reference is clearly expressed in the form of wish or rejection, one can speak directly of egocentric predicates. We do not, however, want to separate such reactions from value judgments as a distinct group. For reasons stated below, we also count the following as value judgments. Iron, useful metal. Water, one of the most interesting chemical substances. Scoundrel, disgrace. Value judgments expressed in the form of an activity. Smoke, stinks. Apple, tastes nice. Are best placed with the predicates. We also count as a value judgment reactions in which a value is not stated but demanded. Good, one should be. Diligent, that pupil should be. To threaten, one must not. Such reactions are not frequent in normal subjects. We merely mention them for the sake of completeness. The adjective refers to an external, less significant, possibly coexistent, and perceptible characteristic of the stimulus. For this type of predicate, we should like to use the term external. The adjective refers to an external, less significant, possibly coexistent, and perceptible characteristic of the stimulus. Tooth, protruding. Water, wavy. These are external, observable characteristics. Tree, brown. Exercise book, blue. Salt, granular, etc. We assess the predicate relation between adjective as stimulus word and noun as reaction according to the principles explained above. We assess the predicate relation between adjective as stimulus word and noun as reaction according to the principles explained above. Thus, in classifying, we evaluate green, meadow, meadow, green as more or less equivalent. Aschenberg has with some reason considered interjections as predicates, but we have interpreted them differently. A further subgroup of predicates is made up of the relationships of nouns and verbs. The subject relation. The noun as the stimulus word, and the reaction is the subject of a definite activity. Resin, sticks. Hunter, to shoot. To cook, mother. Well, to cook mother is different from mother cooks. Very different, isn't it? Let's see. The object relation, the noun as the stimulus word, and the reaction is the object of the definite activity. Door, to open. To recruit, soldiers. To clean, brass. Throat, to strangle. Wait a minute, I just want to look at this again. Subject relation. Mother, well, I just wonder why they switched and put the verb mother cook. So, resin, sticks. This is a subject-verb relation. Hunter shoots, mother cooks. Okay, but I wonder why they put mother in the other column. That's kind of funny. The object relation. So door opens. That's what happens to a door. Well, open door. Recruit soldiers. Clean brass. Strangle throat. These are object relations. The predicates so far discussed cannot easily be distinguished from the above-mentioned coordination by example. If the attributive part of this stimulus word, let me read that again. The predicates so far discussed cannot easily be distinguished from the above-mentioned coordination by example. if the attributive part is the stimulus word. For this diagnosis, we consider decisive the subject's evident effort to find a reaction word, i.e., a noun, as appropriate as possible to the stimulus word with a general validity, as in pray, pious person, despise, wickedness, give in, peace loving. Thus, we count to clean brass as an object relation and to clean shining metal as a coordination by example. Specifications of place, time, means, and purpose are somewhat loosely connected with the group of predicates. Rauschenberg's end-defining association. Place to go, into town. Time to eat, 12 o'clock. Means to beat, with a stick. Purpose, wood, for burning. Let me read the top part again. Specifications of place, time, and means and purpose are somewhat loosely connected with the group of predicates. One can sometimes, with these reactions, be in doubt about whether perhaps they are to be interpreted as specification and therefore belong to subordinates. But in most cases, the decision will be easy, so that error will not be too great. Definitions or explanations of the stimulus word, which in general occur very rarely, have a certain connection with the group discussed above, for which reason they too have been placed in the group of predicative relations. Example, door, noun, blue, adjective, star, heavenly body. Wait a minute. I'm not sure what the point is here. One can sometimes, with these reactions, be in doubt about whether perhaps they are to be interpreted as specification and therefore belong to subordinations. But in most cases, the decision will be easy, so that error will not be too great. Definitions or explanations of the stimulus word, which in general occur very rarely, have certain connection with the group discussed above. So it's similar if you say to go and then the reaction is into town, to say to go verb. Is that what he's saying? I don't see the connection. For which reason they too have been placed in a group of predicative relation examples. So the stimulus word is door and then the reaction is noun, or the stimulus word is blue and the reaction is adjective. Okay, I think that's what they're saying. The predicative relations are thus made up of the following groups: nouns and adjectives, internal, external, predicate. And it could be either an objective judgment or a value judgment. Noun and verb, subject relation, object relation. Determination of place and time, means and purpose, and definition. Yeah, it is. That's what they're saying. Door is a noun. Okay. C. Causal relationship. Münsterberg. Stimulus word and reaction are linked by causal connection. Examples: pain, tears. To cut, painful. A. Coexistence. The connection of coexistence is contiguity and simultaneity. Contiguity. I've never seen a word like that before. Contiguity. The state of bordering or being direct contact with something.
Contiguity.
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 The state of bordering or being in direct contact with something. Or in psychology definition, sequential occurrence or proximity of stimulus and response, causing their association in the mind. So, for example, I guess let's see. where did we see contiguity? Okay, coexistence. The connection of coexistence is contiguity. It's like cause and effect or simultaneity happening at the same time. The link between the two concepts is not exclusively similarity or affinity, but also temporal coexistence or immediate succession. Spatial coexistence is included in temporal contiguity, as spatial coexistence results from succeeding sense impressions. Example, ink, pen. So the ink comes out of the pen. Exercise book, knife. Okay, I don't really see the relationship between an exercise book and a knife. Table, soup. You put the soup on the table. Christmas, Christmas tree. What is the connection between exercise book and knife? That's a weird one. Church, Sunday. Pupil, teacher. Table, chair. Well, couldn't some of these be like contrasts or opposites? Why are these called? Oh, because they coexist. I guess they're both. Lamp, family. Why are lamp and family connected? Mother, child. Institution, warder. Okay. We also include here reactions like eye, right, pencil, right, paper, right, exercise book, right, ride a horse, ride, saddle, ear, to hear. Okay, the associations with to write are complexes of school memories, the connection of which is conditioned by simultaneity. The other examples concern reactive images associated with the stimulus images by coexistence. B. Identity. The reaction contains no shift or development of the sense, but is more or less synonymous expression of the stimulus word. The synonymous expression is taken from the same language as the stimulus word. Grand, magnificent, pay attention, take notice. In Swiss German usage especially is synonymous. Squabble, quarrel. The synonymous expression is taken from a language other than the stimulus word. It is a translation. Examples, stamp, timbre. Sunday, dimanche. Linguistic motor forms, Zihan, current word compounds and associative word complements, Kreplin, Aschenberg, linguistic reminiscences, Trotschult, word association. In this subgroup of external associations, we collect together all connections of images, which have been canalized through verbal practice. Which have been canalized? What does canalized mean? Let's see. Canalized. Canalize. Convert into a navigable canal. Convey through duct or channel. Canal. Let's see. In this subgroup of external associations, we collect together all connections of images which have been put into a channel, put into a canal through verbal practice. Although logically and historically they may have a different meaning and therefore be put into one of the types mentioned, in dealing with contrasts, we have already mentioned a series of reactions that we interpreted as being such common verbal practice as to be canalized, put into a particular channel. We classify them as canalized verbal associations. Simple contrasts, examples, dark light, sweet sour, white black, like, unlike. Current phrases, examples, hunger to suffer, house and home, of age to come, goods and chattels. But these are very much like the what do they call that? The contiguity and simultaneity. So I don't really see the difference. Let's see. Goods and chattels. Thanks to give. Gallant to be. Trials and tribulations. World and people. Old, frail. Right to do. To come and go. Place and time. Something more. Force to apply. Bread to earn. Head to bow. Bird to bush. Water to drink. To swim. To be able to. Tram to ride. To go for a walk. Revulsion. To arouse. Cat, mouse. To break the news. Proverbs and quotations examples. Everywhere and nowhere. Liberty, equality. Everywhere I'm at home. I, tooth. Do's and don'ts. War and peace. More, light. Meat, drink. Compound words. The reaction word complements the stimulus word and forms a compound word. Table, leg. Needle, case. Mat, hanging. Piano player. Vengeance, to thirst for. Frog, blood. Book, marker. Head, scarf. Tooth, ache. Institute, women's. The reaction may also be such that the stimulus word is repeated in reaction. Tears, tear duct. To knock, knock at. To hear, hear out. Foot, football. Star, starlight. Sweet, sweetmeat. The reaction is essentially only a grammatical variation of the stimulus word. Reshner, association with inflectional form. To die, dead. Kindling, to kindle. Hammer, to hammer. School, scholar. To find, found. Love, to love. Cab, cabby. Murderer, to murder. To this should be added a small group of reactions that can be termed anticipatory. Examples: dark red, light. Slow, short. Grandiose, small. Interjections, which only rarely occur, have been placed in the category of linguistic motor connections, although, as Aschenberg stresses, they represent a predicate. We justify our interpretation by pointing out the highly imperfect linguistic form of the reaction, which, moreover, contains a very strong motor component. Examples: grand, ah, to stink. Poo, to love. Oh. Wait a minute. So interjections, these are interjections which only rarely occur, have been placed in the category of linguistic motor connections. So this is just a reaction, like a physical reaction to a word. The content of sound reactions. The content of this group corresponds to Aschenberg's group of stimulus words acting only by sound. Word completion. We interpret these words in agreement with Aschenberg, only including here reactions that together with the stimulus word form an indivisible word. Examples: wonder, wonderful. Love, Lee. Modest, Lee. Friend, Lee. We also consider addition to the stimulus word to the form a name as word completion. Example: canter, berry. Winter, born. Sound. The reaction is conditioned solely by the sound of the whole. Stimulus sound, stimulus word, or its beginning. Examples: enchain, enchant. Mercenary, merciful. Intention, intestine, to roast. Roast beef. Humility, humidity. Rhyme. Examples: dream, cream. Heart, smart. Leave, grieve. King, ring. Crank, plank. To divide sounds and rhymes into meaningful and meaningless, as Aschenberg does, is not worthwhile, Owing to the rarity of the meaningless ones, we have therefore refrained from doing this. D. Miscellaneous. This is not a very large group of compromises. This not very large group comprises reactions for which no place can be found in the rest of the schema, but which have only very limited connection with one another. Indirect association. Aschenfanberg is well known, is as well known, contrasts the indirect mode of reaction with all other reactions which he regards as direct ones. We can have rejected the quantitatively most disproportionate contradistinction because with educated subjects one can never know how many different contents of consciousness stand between stimulus word and reaction. We cannot, even ourselves, always state how many conscious, half-conscious, or unconscious constellations affect our reactions. We will not enter here into the academic controversies about indirect association. That is, whether the intermediate link is conscious or unconscious, but confine ourselves to stating the phenomenon of the indirect mode of reaction within the framework of our cases we call indirect association, that mode of reaction that is intelligible only on the assumption of an intermediate link between the stimulus word and the reaction. We distinguish 5 forms. Connection by common intermediate concept. Examples. White, far, snowfield. False, blonde. Miss X is false and blonde. Repentance, black, morning. Wait a minute. Connection by common intermediate concept. So if somebody says white and the answer is far, you could make the association of snowfield. Like, imagine that's what they're thinking of? I don't know. False, blonde. Miss X is false and blonde. Repentance, black. Morning. So morning is the intermediate step, the connection between repentance and black. I think that's what they're saying here. To close, round. To turn. So you could explain why somebody would say round in response to close if you consider the word turning. To disgust, odorless, to stink. To fast, to whistle, locomotive. Hay, green, grass. Dozen, 144, heap. Turbid, shallow, water. Red, scent, flower. Bicycle, round, wheel. To walk, pear, under pear trees. To turn earth, to rotate. Rich, 5-franc piece, roll of money. It must be noted that in these associations, the intermediate link is usually clearly conscious. Such reactions are very rare and occur almost entirely in individuals of markedly visual type. Centrifugal sound shift. Aschenfanberg's paraphasic indirect association. Okay, we have to look up paraphasic here. Paraphasic. Paraphasia is a speech disorder with neurological origins. Although the hearing and comprehension of speech may not be inhibited, the production of speech is not correct. The individual may be able to speak fluently, but with errors. So it's a neurological speech disorder where the person can hear and understand speech perfectly well, or probably perfectly well, but when producing speech, there are some problems. Okay. So there's an inner reaction. So wait a minute. Centrifugal sound shift. Aschaffenberg's paraphasic indirect association. So saying the wrong thing? Is that what that means? There's an inner reaction that is, to a greater or lesser extent, clear and meaningful, which, however, in the process of articulating it, is replaced by a canalized association with a similar sound. We therefore designate this group of indirect associations as centrifugal sound shifts. So they say a word and the person gives a reaction, but they give the wrong reaction that sounds similar to the word they meant, I guess. Let's see. Decision to slide. To decide. Stubborn, foolish, mulish. To dress excessive. Overcoat. Society, unit, union. Society, unit, union. To quarrel. To shoot. Dispute. Okay, yeah, so the stimulus word is quarrel, and the person says to shoot, but they meant to say dispute. The stimulus word is hair. The person says blue, but they meant blonde. Sacrifice. The stimulus word is sacrifice, but the reaction is castrate. But they meant to say casket or sacristy. Ear, typhus, tubes. Earth, house, heap. So these words, they mean to say the third word, but which sounds a little bit similar to the reaction word. Metal, fastness, fastened. Love, crate, hate. Pour, hoot, boot. Cordes wants to exclude these reactions from the indirect ones, admittedly, from his point of view, with some justification. The direct inner association appears to be a genuine association and not a sound reaction. So there exists an entirely appropriate and direct intention, which, however, at the moment of enunciation, is shifted towards a similarity of sound to the detriment of the meaning. Such shifts can occur only when the inner image to be expressed does not command the intensity of the attention necessary to set going the appropriate speech mechanism. Deviations into byways only occur when what has to be enunciated is not intense enough, i.e., it does not react a sufficient degree of consciousness. Therefore, we also assume that in spite of correct intention, the intermediate link has remained abnormally obscure, which agrees completely with the accounts of subjects who can observe themselves. Some had no more than a feeling that they had not said the right thing, without being able to point to the intermediate link. Whether in such cases the shift towards similarity of sound occurs at the sending station or the receiving station seems to us irrelevant to the evaluation of the reaction. Centripetal sound shift. The stimulus word is internally replaced by a sound similarity, which in its turn determines the reaction. Usually, the intermediate link is in that case half conscious or unconscious. It must be noted that in all cases here classified, the stimulus word has been correctly understood, so that it is not merely a case of misunderstanding. Usually the intermediate link is in this case half conscious or unconscious. It must be noted that in all cases here classified, the stimulus word has been correctly understood, so that it is not merely a case of misunderstanding. To ride or to slip, slide. To wallow, bird, swallow. Strong, sin, wrong. Malt, pepper, salt. Politics, hefty, policeman. Stroke, knot, string. To hit, to bite, to smite. Malt vinegar, salt. Lazy mist, hazy. To rust, fair, just. Room to caw, rook. Stroke, cigar, smoke. To wallow, throat, swallow. To love, turtle, dove. Pleasure, tape, measure. In our experience, by far the largest number of indirect associations are shifts through sound similarity. What we have said in the preceding paragraph about the consciousness of the intermediate links also applies here. The occurrence of a sound association points to a stimulus word with an inadequate feeling tone. Reaction to the intermediate sound link is likewise a result of insufficient feeling tone of the stimulus word. In this case, the sound association is, in our experience, as indistinct as the stimulus word, and at first, the subject is even unsure of the kind of stimulus word. The reaction is innervated before the act of appreciation has taken place. Okay, I'm just going to take a 1 minute break, and I'll be right back. Okay. Shift by several intermediate links. The intermediate links may be associations that are mechanical, yet of high valency. The reactions in this category are very rare and mostly of abnormal origin. All the types described above can, of course, be found among these reactions. Example: ink, acid. Red, litmus. Bird, mouse. Flutter, bat. Lithe, big. Lice, small. Revenge, rector. right, rectify. Tough, headache, tooth, ache. Shift by several intermediate links. Well, I don't see the connection between ink and acid, but bird, well, okay, bird, mouse. Flutter, bat makes sense. Lice, small makes sense. Revenge, rector, that could make sense. Right, rectify. Well, some of these, tough, headache, toothache, that makes sense to me. Am I abnormal? I don't know. We shall not at present look further into this theory of direct association and acoustic verbal experiments. For the moment, let us simply say that these associations are closely connected with variations in concentration. B. Meaningless reactions. In moments of emotion or embarrassment, reactions are sometimes given that are not words or are not associations. We, of course, separate assonances as sound reactions from mere sounds. What is an assonance? I hope I'm saying that right. Assonance. Assonance in poetry, the repetition of the sound of a vowel or diphthong in non-rhyming stressed syllables, near enough to each other for the echo to be discernible. Example, penitence, reticence. The use of assonance throughout a poem creates a sound of despair.
Assonance.
Right, let me see. I'm just going to ask ChatGPT for some examples of assonance. The rain in Spain falls mainly in the plain, but those rhyme. Men sell the wedding bells. The light of the fire is a sight. Hear the mellow wedding bells. So maybe that one is, so mellow wedding bells. Grow and mow the lawn. Okay. All right, I think I get it. Okay, so we, of course, separate assonances as sound reactions from mere sounds. Among the non-associated words, there are hardly any of inexplicable origin. They are mostly names of objects and the surroundings of the coincidental concepts that are not connected with a stimulus word. Some nonsense reactions are perseverations of the type B, see below. C. Failures. The absence of a reaction we call a failure. The cause of the failure is usually emotional. D. Repetition of the stimulus word. A very small group that could equally well be put into the category of failures. There are, however, normal individuals who cannot help quickly repeating the stimulus word to themselves and then giving the actual reaction. A phenomenon that can be observed outside the experiment in ordinary conversation. This reaction is not included in any of the normal categories. Repeating the stimulus word is, in any case, also an emotional phenomenon. This completes the specific classification of associations. There remain only a few general points that help to clarify the types of association. The egocentric reaction. It is the reaction that certain individuals tend to form ideas or of referencing during the experiment. That is, to give highly subjective judgments that are clearly influenced by a wish or a fear. Such reactions have something individually characteristic and are indicative of certain personalities. Grandmother, I. To dance, I don't like. Unjust, I was not. Praise, for me. To calculate, I cannot. Subjective value judgments. Examples. To be lazy, pleasant. To calculate, laborious. Blood, gruesome. piano, horrible, love, stupid. By perseveration, we understand a phenomenon that consists in the fact that the preceding association conditions the next reaction. In fact, well, let's see. By perseveration, we understand that the phenomenon that consists in the fact that the preceding association conditions the next reaction. We have made it a rule to consider the effect on only the immediately following reaction. Thus, we have excluded an effect that bypasses uninfluenced reactions. We prefer to consider this type of effect under the general heading of constellation. Here we do not want to be prejudiced about the nature of the phenomenon of perseveration. We must point out, however, that perseveration may be caused by psychophysical factors, at present unknown, as well by specific feeling constellations. In practice, two cases of perseveration are to be distinguished. What is that word perseveration? I just want to define it. Perseveration. Perseveration. Continuation of something, such as an activity or thought. Usually to an extreme degree or beyond a desired point. Specifically, psychology, the continual involuntary repetition of thought or behavior. So, perseveration is the continuing of the idea, I guess. Let's see. So here's A. The reaction is an association to a previously used stimulus word. So if they say winter and then the reaction is skates and then the next word is lakes, the person might say ice, which is kind of a continuation of winter. Or to melt, and then the reaction is hot, but then the next word is slow, and the continuation word is fire. There's a reaction to melt and not to slow, really. Water, fall, and then the next word is the next stimulus word is dance, and the person reacts with the word fall, which is again connected to the word water. B, the reaction is not an association to a previously used stimulus word. Examples: the stimulus word is lid, the reaction is box, the next word is rats, and the reaction is basket, which seems like a reaction to box. Okay, softly is the stimulus word, and then the reaction is she comes along, and then gallant, and the reaction is up the steps. It's not really related to softly, more related to the reaction comes along. If at the moment of the experiment consciousness is dominated by a strongly feeling toned complex, then a longer series of heterogeneous stimulus words will be absorbed into the complex, each reaction being influenced by a stimulus word and complex constellation. The more powerful the complex constellation, the more the stimulating image is liable to assimilation. It is not comprehended in its actual and usual sense, but in the special sense adapted by the complex. G. Repetition. In each experiment, the same reactions were counted. The first and second 100 of the associations in normal subjects were counted separately. One could perhaps differentiate between repetition of content and of particular stylistic form, since in normal subjects, particular stereotype reactions constructed with auxiliary words are extremely rare. We have decided not to count repetitions of form. H. Linguistic connection. It is a striking fact that associations are linked to each other not only by meaning, the principles of association, contiguity, and similarity, but also by connection solely external motor acoustic properties. To my knowledge, Bourdon was the first to tackle this question experimentally in his remarkable work Recherches sur la succession des phénomènes psychologiques. He describes investigations into the phonetic linking of associations. Bourdon noted that the top of every page in books contains at random the first noun, adjective, or verb. What? Bourdon noted from the top of every page in books chosen at random, the first noun, adjective, or verb. In this way, he compared 500 pairs of words. The total of phonetically similar words was 312, assuming a phonetic similarity if the words have one or more phonetic element in common. It must be noted, however, that Bourdon interpreted this similarity somewhat widely, e.g., for example, toi and jouer because of the W sound. Bourdon examined especially the ressemblance phonétique graphique, one or more common letters, and the syllabique, common syllable. He found the following comparative figures. Ressemblance phonétique 6.629, graphique 0.888, syllabique 0.063. Bourdon finds il reste néanmoins vrai que les mots se sentent entre eux plutôt par leur signification que par leur ressemblance phonétique. What? It remains, I don't know what that néanmoins vrai, what is que les mots, that the words associated between them are, and their meaning sound the same. Oh my. Oh wait, I can copy and paste this. Let me copy and paste this and have a translation. Wait. Let me see. It nevertheless remains true that the words are associated with each other more by their meaning than by their phonetic resemblance. So he found more association between meaning than sound in that little experiment. In accordance with these investigations, we have assembled a group that contains external linguistic factors. A, the same grammatical form, we simply counted how often the form of the word was the same in the stimulus word as in the reaction. That is, how often noun, adjective, adjective occurred together. We arrived at this question because we had observed that large individual variations exist. B, the same number of syllables. We counted how often the stimulus word and the reaction contain the same number of syllables, with the object of finding out more about the influence of rhythm. C, phonetic agreement. Consonants, we counted how often the first syllable of the stimulus word and the reaction agreed, at least as regards the vowel. 2, alliteration. Here we noted how often the stimulus word and the reaction alliterated to the first vowel consonant. 3, the same ending. Here we examined the phonetic influence of the ending of the stimulus word on the ending of the reaction, that is, the tendency to rhyme. Here we only noted whether the final syllables tallied. Summary: internal associations. Grouping, coordination by common general concept, by similarity, by internal relationship, by external relationship, by example. Subordination, actual subordination, specification, superordination, contrast, groupings of doubtful quality, predicative relationship, noun and adjective, internal predicate, objective judgment, value judgment, external predicate, noun and verb, subject relationship, object relationship, determination of place, time, means, and purpose, definition or explanation, causal relationship. B. External associations, coexistence, identity, linguistic motor forms, canalized verbal associations, simple contrasts, current phrases, proverbs and quotations, compound words and word changes, anticipatory reactions, interjections, sound reactions, word completion, sound rhyme, miscellaneous. Indirect associations, connection by common intermediate concept, centrifugal sound shift, centripetal sound shift, shift through word completion or linguistic motor form, shift through several intermediate links, meaningless reactions, failures, repetition of the stimulus word. E. The egocentric reaction, direct ideas of reference, subject value judgments, perseveration. F. Connection with a previous stimulus word, no connection with the previous stimulus word. G. Repetition of the reaction. H. Linguistic connection, the same grammatical form, the same number of syllables, phonetic agreement, consonants, alliteration, the same ending. We have classified our material to the principles laid down in the schema in order not to complicate the presentation of the results unnecessarily by a plethora of figures. The graphs published in Part 2 reproduce only the figures of the main groups, allowing the extensive material to be grouped more clearly than with a detailed report of the figures of all the subgroups. For reasons of scientific integrity, we considered ourselves obliged to give an exact account of the kind of consideration that led us to the classification of the associations in one or other main group. Also, it seemed to us of general interest to state the different empirical possibilities of the associations so far as they are known to us. Thus, our figures concern merely the main groups of the schema: internal associations, grouping, predicative relationship, causal relationship. 2. External associations, coexistence, identity, linguistic motor forms. 3. Sound reactions, word completion, sound, rhyme. 4. Miscellaneous, indirect associations, meaningless reactions, failures, repetitions of the stimulus word. A. Perseveration. B. The egocentric reaction. C. Repetition of the reaction. D. Linguistic connection. 1. The same grammatical form. 2. Same number of syllables. 3. Alliteration. 4. Consonants. 5. Same ending. Okay, and then part 2 starts, but I think I'm going to finish here because I think, how long has it been? I've been reading almost 3 hours, so I have to rest. So I will start again later with part 2 with the results of the experiment. And for all the people who are watching this, thank you, and I'll see you later. Goodbye.